Greetings, Internet. My name is Trafalgar D. Waterlaw, teching, and today we're going to be looking at every disease in the One Piece world. This is One Piece Disease Support. This is where the intro to Wired's tech support series would play, but I'm not going to use that because I don't own it. But no, unironically though, I would love for Matt Mercer, who plays Law in the One Piece Funimation dub, he also does Critical Role, but he also voices Law. I would love him to do pretty much exactly what I'm doing right now, like Matt Mercer dressed up as Law, using Law's voice to answer various One Piece themed questions. He's already been on the Wired channel before. He did the autocomplete interview with the cast of Critical Role, so man, if that ever happened, that would just make my existence right there. But anyway, yeah, today, Law Teching, that is me, is going to be talking about the various diseases in One Piece, because there's a lot of them, probably a lot more than you would remember unless you're a super fan of the story like Teching is. I'm the only doctor he knew, so he came to me and I'm like, yeah, I got it, don't worry about it, especially since there is a brand new disease that was just revealed in the last chapter of One Piece, chapter 1098, so spoilers for everybody involved. We will get to that one eventually, but we got some other diseases to kind of like lead in with. Honestly, if you write down all of the diseases in the One Piece world, which I have right in front of me here, it gives me pause if I was ever isekai'd into that realm, you know? If I ever got isekai'd into the One Piece world, I would not be worried about, like, the Yonko or the government or anybody trying to, like, wipe me out. It would probably be more of one of these diseases, is honestly the thing that you should really be scared of. There are some messed up things that can happen to you in the One Piece world, all right, that has nothing to do with the people of the One Piece world, all right. Well, anyway, let's get started with the first disease that was ever showcased in the One Piece story. You know what it is? Oh, yeah. And you know what? This is great because it's one of the diseases on this list that is actually a real-world disease that Oda took inspiration for and just put it in the One Piece world, right? We're, of course, talking about that ultimate piratey disease, Scurvy! And that's the way you have to say it. If anybody, there isn't that many people, I would imagine, that are getting diagnosed with scurvy as much as back in the day. But if you ever do get diagnosed with it, you go into a hospital, doctor looks at you, the doctor does have to pronounce it as scurvy. And if they just say scurvy, they're not a real doctor. Sorry to say. So anyway, yeah, scurvy. We first see this disease when the Straw Hats are leaving Syrup Village, right? And they're going toward the Baratier, or rather, this is actually the events that lead them to the Baratier. Usopp and Luffy are firing a cannon at a rock. They hit the rock, which unfortunately Johnny and Yosaku were docked at. They go on the ship, and you find out that, yeah, Johnny and Yosaku are Zoro's old bounty hunter buddies, but that Yosaku has been stricken with an unknown disease. He's pale. His teeth are falling out. An old wound that he had is bleeding, and he also apparently seems to be suffering from damage from a cannonball hitting a rock that he was hanging out on. It's a little strange, honestly. I don't know what's going on with that. But anyway, he's dying, and it's not looking good. Thankfully, Nami knew this disease instantly. It was a pretty common disease that apparently used to be prevalent all up and down the Grand Line in the Four Blues until people figured out how to solve the issue. Nami mentions that scurvy is caused from a vitamin C deficiency. So back in the day, and this is a real thing, back in the day, you couldn't carry fresh fruits and vegetables and things on ships for very long because they would rot and, you know, you couldn't eat them anymore, right? Well, the problem with that is you don't have multivitamins around yet, and you kind of need vitamin C to survive. So vitamin C deficiency can lead to scurvy, and as for the conditions in the One Piece world, you know, Yosaku was very pale, he was losing teeth, and some old wounds he had were opening up. He also seemed very lethargic, he couldn't really move around too much, and he seemed to be in constant pain, although that might be from the cannonball shot, to be honest with you, right? Now, because this is the One Piece world, this problem, this disease, can be easily remedied by just pouring a bunch of lime juice into somebody's mouth. Which, technically speaking, yes, getting vitamin C into the body that has vitamin C deficiency is the way that you would cure the disease, but it's One Piece, so after just squirting a couple of limes into Yosaku's mouth, his teeth just magically regrow, and his wound closes up, and he gets his complexion back, and he jumps up, and he's dancing around the merry, like everything's happy, okay? So, yeah, don't think that scurvy that's far along as chronic as the situation is with Yosaku would be solved just like that, but the general idea is there. Honestly, it's so much there in the One Piece world that in a textbook in France, you actually see a screenshot from the One Piece anime, a medical textbook. This is a real medical textbook that exists in our world that uses a screenshot from One Piece on how to cure scurvy. So Gotta love that. But yeah, that be the disease known as scurvy, and it doesn't seem to be that prevalent in the One Piece world. It's never really brought up again after this. I think it's because of Vegapunk, honestly, because Vegapunk is sort of responsible for the technological boom in the One Piece world, so a lot of times you'll see really anachronistic stuff where you'll have a sailing vessel like the Mary, but it has like a refrigerator on it, okay? So because of Vegapunk providing the necessary means to store food properly for prolonged sea voyages, you don't need to worry about scurvy anymore. So that's Vegapunk's one of his contributions, one of his many contributions to the One Piece world. So in fact, I think it's only this disease and one other disease on the list that is an actual disease that exists in our world that Oda put in One Piece. Everything else is kind of just generated by Oda for the sake of his fantasy story. And so with that being said, we're now leading on to the next one, the 5-day disease. Now, this was the disease that struck Nami when they were heading from Little Garden to Alabasta. They had to make an emergency stop in Drum Island to find a doctor. Nami was extremely sick. She hid it for a while because she didn't want to let the crew worry because they had to get to Alabasta to help out Vivi and everything like that, take down Crocodile. But she started to experience extreme fatigue and a very red-hot fever. A fever to the point where, like, Luffy felt her head at one point and his, hand was burning. So I'm assuming Nami was burning up pretty bad there, pretty severe fever. Straw Hats didn't really know what to do, so that's why they had to dock at Drum, and they eventually reached the castle on top of the Drum Rockies. Luffy made this very treacherous climb, but he made it all the way up, and that's when Kureha and Chopper were able to cure the 5-day disease. Now, the disease is actually caused by a poisonous tick that existed in the humid jungles of Little Garden. Now, the tick is known as the Kestia and went extinct a while ago in the rest of the world, but because Little Garden was an island that was like prehistoric, it had thrived there, okay? So Nami, you actually do see it in the anime, the scene where Nami jumps out of the burning fire after they burn down Mr. Three's candelabra set and everything like that. Nami's shirt burns off, okay? So she's just walking around in a bra for the latter half of Little Garden, right? And so you actually do see the scene in the anime where she's bitten by some kind of bug, and she's like, ow, something bit me. Whatever, who cares? And that was the Kestia. It also leaves a very distinctive mark or bruise on the subject's area wherever they got bit, okay? So the way Kureha explained this disease was it causes severe exhaustion, sweating, fatigue, fever, and heart and brain failure, eventually leading to the patient's death within 5 days. And that's what leads into that very dramatic scene when after Kureha was explaining everything to Nami and the kind of disease she had, is like, oh yeah, the pain you were feeling must have been horrible, but it would have eased up in about 2 more days if you wouldn't have seen anybody at all. And Nami's like, oh, okay, I would have been fine regardless. And Kureha's like, yeah, you wouldn't have been feeling any pain whatsoever because you'd be dead at that point. And Nami's like, ah. So that's pretty terrifying to find out you came within a hair's breadth of dying of a disease, okay, and you managed to make it all the way to the top of that castle and Kureha saved you. Now, Kureha, master doctor, of course, so she was able to cure Nami pretty quickly. In fact, quicker than most people could. Kureha mentions that the disease usually can be cured with various antibiotics, but that takes about 10 full days to make a full recovery. With Kureha's medicine, I think it only took about 3 or 4 days because she's just so good at what she does, right? And I also remember a couple of other explanations of this disease, the 5-day disease, the Kestia bug, depending on the dub that you're watching. So in the Funimation dub, I remember Kureha specifically mentions that the disease gives you arthritis and choroiditis. I don't know what choroiditis is. I tried to look it up and I didn't really understand it. But arthritis I get, like, pain in like the joints and stuff like that. That happens. In the 4Kids dub, it's interesting. So initially, they diagnose Nami. Vivi comes up with a thing. I think she also says this in the actual canon of the story, but they call it something specific in the 4Kids dub. They call it Grand Line Fever. And Vivi basically says, yeah, there's a thing on the Grand Line that a lot of people get when they first enter, and it's called Grand Line Fever, and you could die from it, okay? And so in the canon, I think that she says basically that the weather patterns and the crazy climate when you go into the Grand Line, if you're not prepared for it, it can afflict you with various diseases, or you can become very run down health-wise because of the change in climate in the Grand Line. So that is something that, yeah, is technically, like, there is no such thing as Grand Line Fever in the manga, but I could see something like that existing. You know what I mean? Like, you go into the Grand Line, there's these crazy weather patterns. This island is freezing, the very next island is boiling hot. A change in climate can affect your physical health. It definitely can. So the idea that something like Grand Line Fever would exist and would be common to sailors first entering the place, that does track with me. So I would say that Grand Line Fever is technically a disease, but it's something a lot more broad than just one thing, okay? Probably everybody would experience different health effects depending on their current state gate when they entered the Grand Line, right? It's not called the Kestia in the 4Kids dub. It's called the Stingy Dingy Bug. You've been bitten by the Stingy Dingy Bug. So 4Kids, every now and then there's something that's like, oh yeah, Grand Line fever. I mean, I understand that. That could make sense. The Stingy Dingy Bug is like, all right. Sure, okay, fine, why not? Well, anyway, Nami was cured of this, but it is a fatal disease if you're not treated within 5 days, so pretty scary, okay? The next disease is another one that is from our world that does exist here, and then Oda just put it in here. This was a disease, it was called different things depending on the dub. In the Funimation dub, it was called Kason disease. Another version is the Benz, and then the actual disease is Diver's disease. I think just Chopper calls it in the original manga. He just calls it Diver's disease. This was a disease that was afflicting Mont Blanc cricket because he was a diver that would go down to the seabed around Jaya to try to find artifacts from Nolan's City of Gold. So he was just diving down every single day and then resurfacing and not giving his body enough time to acclimate to the different pressure changes because he was so dedicated to try to find proof of the City of Gold, okay? And so Kason disease, or the Benz, is something that does exist in our world. The reason it's called Kason disease, I thought it was like the name of somebody, like, yes, Kason disease, named after John Kason in 1822 or something like that. No, Kason, I guess, is taken from, I think it's an Italian word that is for large box, and I don't think it's Kason. I think it might be Casson or something like that. But anyway, it's a term for a large box, and they were structures that were built to work on things like bridges. Like when you're building a bridge, you got to keep the water back so you can build the bridge, or like the foundation of the bridge. A caisson would be built, and so people would go way under there into deep pressure in order to perform like various construction jobs in order to get the original structure of the bridge set up so a bridge can be built. They did this with the Brooklyn Bridge in New York City, okay? On top of not being a doctor, I'm also not a civil engineer, so I don't know anything about this, really. But the idea is the same basic premise. You're going down to depths where there's more pressure on your body, and you're surfacing so fast that you're not giving your body chances to decompress. And of course, they didn't really have things like decompression chambers, certainly not in the One Piece world, okay? Although Vegapunk probably has one. What happens is you end up with air bubbles in your bloodstream. Those air bubbles will then expand and then get out of your body, so this can damage your bloodstreams, your blood vessels, your muscles, your bones can be wrecked after prolonged, dives, and this keeps happening to you. These air bubbles keep expanding inside of you. It's not a fun time. In our modern world, we have decompression chambers, so you can literally go into a decompression chamber and put like an oxygen mask on and be like, and then you could get, the blood to acclimate and go back to the way it was that way. But, yeah, at least especially in the One Piece world, just diving down into the water like Cricket kept doing over and over and over again every single day without giving his body time to, like, acclimate to it, that could really wreck you, and it could have eventually led to his death. By the way, anybody that's watching this that is a real, legitimate doctor, let me know about stuff that I'm not getting right. Like, just the bends, air bubbles, expand. I don't know. I'm not a real doctor. I'm just dressed like a guy with a funny hat that is a doctor in a fictional story, right? Okay. Forever, any other possible credentials, I have my colleague here, Dr. Chopper. So, Dr. Chopper, what do you think? Yes, we are professionals. Absolutely, of course. We're both wearing funny hats. Okay. Next disease. Let's talk about tree fever. Did you ever get tree fever? Oh, yeah, it's not good. It's not a fun time. Oddly enough, this is a disease that, I don't know if it's ever mentioned exactly how it kills you, but it does. All right? So this was a disease that we saw in the flashback 400 years ago. Was it 400 years ago or 200 years ago? No, it was 400 years ago. It was with Nolan. Nolan was 400 years ago. The St. Brice, the ship that fell out of the sky, that was 200 years old. Nolan was 400 years ago. Yeah. So when Nolan was visiting the original homeland or Jaya of the Shandians, before it got blasted into the sky and all that stuff, there was a disease that was afflicting the tribe there, Kalgura's tribe, and that was known as tree fever. So it was this greenish rash that was covering the person's body, and it apparently had a 90% fatality rate if you were afflicted with this. Now, the Shandians had no idea what it was, so they just assumed this is the wrath of a god, a vengeful god. So that's why they would resort to human sacrifice in order to cure the tribe of this ailment, okay? Now, Nolan, on the other hand, is a botanist. Amongst his other talents, Nolan was a botanist, and he recognized it right away that this was tree fever, and it was it was untreated for the tribe. So he's just like, oh my god, so many people must have died from this, but it's okay because I am Mont Blanc Noland. I am professional botanist. And so he knew the exact cure for the tree fever was to cut down various other trees to make the cure. Unfortunately, that the trees that Nolan cut down to make the cure were sacred to the Shandians, and so this led to a little bit of a misunderstanding. It wasn't really good, but he did end up saving a couple of the tribe's people's lives. I remember there was a tribe member called Seto that was afflicted with tree fever that Nolan was able to cure, okay? I don't know if it was ever actually stated how it really kills you. I think it was just generic, like, I am sick and dying, and now I'm dead, right? This is also very similar to the disease that afflicted Yorkie, who was the original captain of the Rumbar pirates before Brooke, and half of the Rumbar crew apparently got stricken with some unknown disease, and then they had to be left behind, and then Brooke became the new captain of the Rumbar pirates, continued onward. Brooke and the crew eventually got killed by another crew with using poison arrows, and so Brooke died and came back, and in the Florian Triangle. I guess Brooke came back from death. So is death a disease? I guess death would be the ultimate, the worst possibility of a disease, I guess, would be death. But in which case, doesn't matter. Brooke found the cure for that. Turns out it's the Yomi Yomi Nomi. There you go. Brooke found the cure for death. There it is. But at any rate, the other remaining members of the Rumbar crew, so Yorkie and everybody, stayed behind. The disease seemed very similar to tree fever. They were afflicted with the same kind of rash all over them. Who knows? Maybe Yorkie is still alive and they found the cure at some point, because it is a curable disease if it was tree fever. Maybe the Rumbar crew didn't know what it was because they weren't, expert botanists like Noland was, right? Okay. Well, anyway, yeah, that's tree fever. Oh, also, weird thing about tree fever that it was specifically mentioned in the manga, that it's a disease that literally crosses from plants to animals and vice versa. So humans get the disease from plants, and then humans can spread the disease to other plants, and then it's this perpetual cycle that even Noland mentioned has wiped out entire islands. So this is fascinating. It's very similar to like how certain diseases can make the jump from like cows and chickens and pigs in our world. Like, oh no, it's swine flu or it's bird flu or whatever. Jump to humans, and that causes us to get really, really sick, okay? So it's fascinating that this could exist with plants. I don't know if this is a real thing in our world, where it's like you can get the flu and then somehow the disease, the bacteria that's affecting you could spread to a tree and afflict the tree. I don't think that's a thing in our world, but if it was, that would be terrifying, and you could think about it in the One Piece world if diseases could spread between plants and animals and vice versa, and that could damage like an entire ecosystem effectively. That's what tree fever was. So pretty scary. Moving on next, I think now we are going to cover some of the more recent diseases in One Piece, and then we'll talk about some other stuff. So let's talk about Sapphire Scale now, okay? This is the disease that was afflicting Jory Bonnie and her mother Ginny in the last chapter, okay? So Sapphire Scale, we don't know that much about it yet. We know that it's a disease that covers your skin. It seems to be some kind of skin disease similar to skin cancer, where these very hard sapphire scales show up on you, where they really do look like sapphires. They're like hard chunks of your flesh, and like you can't really peel them off. It reminds me a lot of Grayscale. I think a lot of people were comparing that to Grayscale from Game of Thrones. There are some notable differences, though. So with Grayscale in Game of Thrones, it eventually drives you insane, like to the point where you're just insane and just like attacking anybody, and you're just like a wild animal. That doesn't seem to be the case in One Piece with Sapphire Scale. Ginny, who had the disease covering her entire body and what she died from, was still able to have her own, mind about her when she called the Revolutionary Army to say goodbye to everybody there. Okay, so that doesn't seem to be the issue. Also, it seems to afflict it specifically when you get hit by sunlight. So if you get hit by sunlight, the disease progresses rapidly, and the disease will cover your entire body and eventually kill you. Now, even if you stay out of the sun, like Bonnie, when Bonnie was shown to have the affliction at a young age, at like age 3 or 4, Kuma just kept her inside of the church and boarded all the windows shut and kept her in the dark, and so that way the disease didn't progress. However, even with the actual scales not covering her body, a doctor told Kuma that she will still die in less than 5 years. The disease will rapidly spread even without the disease actually covering your flesh. So this has led to some people thinking that, like, oh, actually it's possible that what if Vegapunk, or rather, what if Kuma was able to use his pawpaw fruit to repel the disease, put it into himself, and then his body was slowly replaced as a robotic body, and that way he couldn't die, or like replace his flesh or something. So I don't think it's a situation just simply replacing the flesh. If it's going to kill you no matter what. It's something that's like in your genetic code at that point. I guess that could have still maybe worked because Kuma was turned into a pacifista, but he is still partly organic, and the organic parts still seem to be functioning. I guess it's possible. But no, I think there's some other method that, Vegapunk is going to use to cure the Sapphire Scale disease. Some people have also said that it might involve Bonnie's Toshi Toshi no Mi in some way. Like maybe she can have a parallel future where she doesn't get sick, although it seems the effects of the Toshi Toshi no Mi, at least on a lot of other people, are not permanent. They're only a temporary effect. However, since Bonnie is the user of the fruit, it might be different rules regarding her. So something like that might be the case. But yeah, it's a disease. If you're exposed to natural sunlight or even like any kind of natural light, even moonlight, it doesn't have to be necessarily sunlight. Artificial light, not really sure if that would work, but Kuma seems to have kept most of the church, in darkness. Maybe he like lit lanterns and stuff. Maybe that didn't afflict Bonnie all that much. Like it has to be some form of natural light. We don't exactly know how it's transmitted. We can assume it is a sexually transmitted disease because Ginny was taken by a celestial dragon and then she ended up pregnant with Bonnie, who also has the disease. So it could be something like that. The doctor did mention you don't really see a case of Sapphire Scale around anymore. Most doctors didn't even know what it was. So it's something that's pretty damn rare that might only happen when you're afflicted. It's possible that Saturn could be involved in this, and Saturn is like some kind of immortal being that's probably just as old as Eem, so several hundred years old. Maybe he was carrying a disease that he would not die from because he's like some crazy eldritch, immortal, mythical zone devil demon or something like that. But in the case with any human that Saturn got with, let's say, in that situation, they would get afflicted by that disease and they would rapidly die from it, okay? And then it is also hereditarily passed on to the next generation, as is the case with Bonnie, okay? So we don't exactly know how it's cured yet, but there's clearly some type of cure because Bonnie no longer has the scales on her eye, or under her eyes, so something must have happened for her to be cured at some point. But that is Sapphire Scale. We, of course, have the disease that afflicted Law, which, of course, I know a lot about because I'm law teching. We have Amber Lead Syndrome. This one, I think, might be the worst one in the entire One Piece world, honestly. These other ones, like Sapphire Scale, is not good. But when it comes to Amber Lead, it's the delayed effect that really gets you in the sense of it, like, being a really horrible disease, okay? So Amber Lead Syndrome is a disease when you're handling amber lead, which is a mineral that was mined in and around Flevance, the White Town, okay? It was this mineral that they found, and it could be used for a variety of different things, and it was really cool, and it basically made the entire city of Flevance rich, okay? People wore fancy suits, there were cool-looking fountains, there was ice cream, everything was great in Flevance, okay? Well, the problem is that there is this delayed poison effect, and it isn't just delayed in the sense that, like, oh, if you handled it, you're going to die in a couple of days. No, let's say the person that initially handles the amber lead was like a young man, okay? And they were like a miner and they're digging in the cave and they found the amber lead. Like, we found it, and they're handling it. They're getting the dust all over them and everything like that, okay? It doesn't afflict them right away. They will actually spend most of their lives without any, ill effects, okay? Well, then they will grow up and then they will have kids, and then those kids will grow up and then they will have kids, and then that'll just keep going on. And then in about like 50 years, there's this delayed effect where all of a sudden every single person that not only handled the amber lead, but was a child of somebody that was afflicted with amber lead syndrome, all at once at the same time, the symptoms will appear and you will die. So the person that originally mined the amber lead could be like 70 years old at this point. Their child could be 50. Their grandchild could be in their 20s. And they could even have great-grandchildren that are like babies at this point. And every single one of them will be afflicted with the symptoms, which is like these white splotches showing up all of your body. Your hair begins to turn like gray and white. And then you're just stricken with intense pain and fever. And then you're just writhing around in agony for a few weeks or months. And then eventually you die from that. Just like, And so because of this, the government locked down the city of Flevance. By the way, the government knew about this like long time ago. They figured out like, oh yeah, this amber lead, this is problematic. This is poisonous. This is going to kill people in about 50 years. But hey, we can make some money off it in the meantime, so we'll just go ahead with that. And then when it's afflicted and like everybody starts exhibiting symptoms in Flevance, we'll just quarantine the entire city, put a blockade around that, go in there and just murder everyone. Okay, and then we'll just say it's a contagious disease. So, people could be more afraid. Can I ask you a question? What was the purpose of the government lying about it being a these, because you think that would cause more panic and unrest in the world, which it did. Like, I can understand them, like, looking at it and being like, amber lead. Yeah, this is poisonous, but you can use a lot. You can make some stuff out of this. We'll make some money off this, and we'll just ignore it. And then after 50 years, couldn't you just say, oh, yeah, turns out amber lead was poisonous, so nobody use amber lead anymore, and everybody would be like, oh, okay, we're not touching that anymore. You don't have to go the whole lie route with it and be like, it's contagious. If you know somebody that has amber lead, you're going to get it too. Stay away, unclean. I don't see the point in that. I just don't see how the government really, like, what was the advantage that they had there, other than just maybe they lied and they didn't want to correct themselves because the world government is like, oh, no, we're always right. So it's just like, oh, yeah, it's contagious. Actually, sir, it's not contagious. We're going to double down. It's super contagious. It might have been something like that, maybe. I just don't see any advantage for them to, blockade Flevance and murder everyone in the town. It's just like the money from the amber lead industry has already been made. It's already happened, and nobody's going to be using amber lead after this anymore. It doesn't matter. No one's going to be using it because everyone knows it's poisonous now. The whole world knows it's poisonous, right? So it's whatever. Anyway, Law had this disease. That's why Corazon traveled the world to try to find somebody to cure him. All the doctors behaved in a very not doctorly manner by basically, forcing him as like, get out of the hospital, get away. No quarantine, no nothing. It's like, no, his presence here, everybody will die. It's like, okay, well, you're a doctor. Don't you at least want to figure out the cure? Nope, there is no cure. Burn him. That's the cure. So those are the doctors in the One Piece world for you. And you can see what also inspired Law to become a good doctor. That's the whole idea. So the way that Law finally cured himself from this, there was really no cure to amber lead syndrome. The cure was a very complex surgery that could pretty much only be conducted once you have consumed the op fruit. So you basically have to have the powers of a devil fruit, the op fruit, in order to cure yourself, okay? So the way that Law cured himself of amber lead was actually never shown in the manga, but it was specified in the Law light novel series, which I assume is basically canon. I mean, it's not, but I don't think there's going to be ever a time where Oda explains this. So essentially what Law did after he consumed the op fruit is he figured out how to use his room, and he removed his liver from his body. So he removed his liver, and he literally had to go through and painstakingly remove every single bit of the amber lead that was in his body with his devil fruit power, and then pop his liver and all of his internal organs back into himself. This is obviously not a surgery that can be conducted in our world or by anybody else in the One Piece world. The only way you could do this is with the powers of the op fruit that allows you to, like, remove your organs but not be killed by the removal. Like, you could take out your heart and just, like, pick the bits of amber lead out of your heart and just pop it back into you, and you're fine. You're right as rain. So that's effectively how Law had to cure himself doing it, okay? So only someone with the op fruit could perform this kind of operation. So that's for that reason. It was not cured, and all the horrible things and the delay effect where it hits everybody in multiple generations at once. Not fun. Not good. All right, so the next disease we're going to be talking about is love sickness. This is something I actually brought up not that long ago in another video talking about the Kuja. So love sickness seems to be a disease that only afflicts the heads of the Kuja tribe, specifically the empresses of Amazon Lily, when they become stricken with a love for somebody that's outside of the island, and if they choose to stay on the island, they die of this love sickness. It's apparently extremely painful heartache, and then a fever, and then they just die. This happened to the previous empress, and the only way to cure it is to leave the island and go and be with the person that you have these feelings for. In the case with Boa, it was Luffy. We don't know exactly, but we assume the case with Gloriosa might have been Whitebeard, okay? But it's a very interesting kind of disease that might be more psychosomatic, if nothing else. Maybe not necessarily something that's like some kind of pathogen that gets into you, or a tick biting you, or the handling of lead, or something like that. It's more of something where the idea is you're repressing your emotions. The idea you're repressing your emotions and stuff, especially like Boa living on the island of women, okay? And so she fell for Luffy, and she didn't really know how to process those emotions, and so that got her very, very sick. Now, the cure for this is not necessarily to run off and be with Luffy. It's not like Boa has to be next to Luffy or else she gets horribly sick. The idea is expressing her love for Luffy, being okay with it, not repressing it, okay? So Boa hasn't seen Luffy in quite some time, but she's clearly not stricken with the love sickness. She's clearly cured, and I think the reason why she's cured is because she accepts the fact she's in love with Luffy and fawns over him and just like, oh my god, Luffy, someday we're going to get married, which is never going to happen, but, it is apparently that's enough to just accept herself and who she, loves, and not, like, pushing that away is the thing that was the cure for the ailment, okay? But it is it is fatal because the previous empress never left the island and she died. So there you go. It might be something more, like I said, psychosomatic, where it's just like you believe that you're going to die of this disease and maybe you might do it. Like the mind's a powerful thing. Those kind of diseases certainly exist in our world, and you could just kind of dial them up to like 10 in the One Piece world, where it's like, you know, what are these feelings of love I'm feeling? My heartache, my heart will break and stop beating unless I'm with them. And then in the One Piece world, that might actually happen. Like the heart literally just stops beating and you die. So there it is. A couple of other diseases we have here. We have the Kiss Germ. This is something weird. This was something I completely forgot about. This was in the cover page of Beiji's Oh My Family. During the cover page, we go back to Dressrosa when Beiji is at Dressrosa, and it was under attack by the Germ pirates. Pirates of the Germ, I guess. Not the Germa, just the Germ. And they showed up on the island, and there was apparently a disease that they were all afflicted with called the Kiss Germ, where when somebody was afflicted with this, they became essentially like a kissing zombie, where they were carriers of the disease and they were like forced to like run around like zombies and like kiss other people, therefore spreading the disease to more and more people. Okay. I likened it to like cooties. It's basically cooties, but it's a real disease that exists in the One Piece world. We don't know what it does to you when you get afflicted, other than like you get afflicted and you're like, oh no, I have the kiss disease. I need to, you know, and you're just going around and like kissing people to then spread it. So I guess it spreads through saliva or something. It's just, very gross kind of disease. Not sure if it has a devil fruit origin, if the captain of the Germ pirates has the germ fruit. It might be the weakened form of Doc Q's sick fruit, which we're going to get to in a moment, but that is a disease that exists in One Piece. It's basically a contagious form of cooties. But yeah, let's just talk about Doc Q at this point. So Doc Q has the power of the sick fruit, the fruit that is essentially the exact opposite of Mansherry's heal fruit. So it governs all types of diseases. So I guess with just the wave of a hand, he doesn't even have to be right next to you, he can afflict a large group of people with a particular disease. And I guess it can be any disease that maybe Doc Q is aware of, or maybe a disease that he's been afflicted with himself, or maybe there's no limit. It's just any disease in the One Piece world. He can even make up his own diseases if he wanted to, maybe. And he can afflict people with those diseases. The only example that we've seen him utilize is the feminization disease that he used against Law's crew, the Heart Pirates. This is a disease that apparently, if I guess it only afflicts you if you're a male, because it's called the feminization disease. So if you were born biologically male, this disease changes your very sex, I guess your chromosome and everything, so now you are biologically female. There you go. It just changes your sex. I'm not sure if it works from female to male, but it definitely from male to female. Okay, so there's the idea there. Now, Law, because he was pretty strong at this point, realized that as long as you just exert enough haki, you can basically nullify the effects of any devil fruit, and that's what he does. He uses his haki, he breaks out of that, and he turns back into a male. Yeah, that's the disease that exists in the One Piece world. And it seemed like Doc Q used it as more of a joke or a gag rather than trying to seriously like bring down Law's crew. I guess it would, cause you to be very confused all of a sudden if you just flip sexes out of nowhere. So maybe he was doing that just to mess with them. But it doesn't seem to be a disease that will actually kill you. It's just something that flips your sex, okay? And so Doc Q, I am sure, though, has a slew of other diseases with his devil fruit that he could afflict on you. Maybe every other disease he can afflict you with scurvy, or that's actually interesting if he could afflict you with like the 5-day illness, like he could mimic the disease caused by a insect or a tick. Could he do something like that? Could he give you amber lead sickness, something like that? Does he have those kind of powers, or does it have to be a disease that could be spread by a particular bacteria or something, not something specific like amber lead syndrome? Yeah, I'm not really sure, but anyway, that's Doc Q's ability. We have the artificial diseases that were created by Queen. I'll just talk about them very briefly. We had Mummy, the virus Mummy, that basically causes your body to heat up really fast and then basically turn into like a zombie, and you begin to like rupture blood all over your body. It also has comparisons to Ebola, and eventually you become just a shriveled up husk on the ground because all of your body temperature rises to the point where you shrivel up, okay? Then you have the Isoni, which is kind of the opposite, where your body constantly cools down to the point where you grow ice claws and horns and you attack other people, also kind of like in a zombie feral kind of like state. Chopper was able to cure both of these. with his magical science. He basically made his own version of a virus, chopperphage, which caused the entire festival hall to be cured of ice oni. So he released it in gaseous form, so breathing it would cure you. It could also be slowed down if you keep close to fire, because basically what it does is it removes all the heat from your body. So if you keep your body warm through an external means, it will slow the spread of ice oni. So there's that. And I think that's the only, I think those are all the diseases of note. There are some unknown diseases in the One Piece world that there's one that's very common that I just call generic old man disease. And that's the disease that kills you if you're an old man. And that was Whitebeard. Whitebeard had generic old man disease. It was never just specified what specific disease Whitebeard had, but it was the thing that made him very sick, coughing up blood, and he couldn't even use like Conqueror's Hockey at Marineford. There was a moment where he was about to use Conquerors to help save Ace, but he began coughing up blood and he couldn't do it, okay? Maybe it's the same thing that like Ukitake had in Bleach, so it's maybe some form of like tuberculosis or something. I'm not really sure, but he had some old man disease. Roger also had some disease. I guess he really wasn't an old man. He was only like, I think in his 50s when he died, so it wasn't super old. But Roger also had some kind of chronic illness that even one of the best doctors in the entire world, who was Crocus, could not cure. Okay, I think if there was any cure for Roger's disease, they would have found it. Maybe Kureha could have done something with it. Maybe Law or some user of the Op fruit could have done something with it. But it seemed to be that, like, yeah, this disease was very, very severe, and all Crocus could do was keep the symptoms at bay. He couldn't actually cure it, okay? And Roger would have ended up dying of this disease anyway, but he decided to just, turn himself into the Marines, and then he was executed. This disease also might not be hereditarily passed down to your children, because Ace did not exhibit any kind of chronic disease. Maybe it doesn't afflict you until you're a lot older, and Ace died when he was only like 23 or something, so sorry, Ace. Maybe he would have had it if he'd grown older, but it doesn't seem to be the case. Not really sure what this was. Might have been some weird bacteria or some kind of virus that Roger caught on some island, and then they never found out what it was, but it was incurable at the time that Roger was sailing, okay? Maybe now it's curable. Maybe Crocus studied it a bit. Maybe Crocus has the cure for it now. So maybe if Luffy catches it, maybe Crocus can show Chopper how to cure it, and then Chopper will fix the disease so Luffy will live longer than Roger did. Maybe it might be something like that. Well, anyway, those are all the diseases in the One Piece world. Also death. I wrote down at the very bottom here, we have death. So, but we already got over that. Brook can cure death. You just need the Yomi Yomi no Mi. There's a cure for everything in the One Piece world, certainly. So anyway, yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. This will be law teching. I'm glad I could grace you with my presence once again and talk about all of the different diseases in the One Piece world. Which one was your favorite? Or rather, which disease in the One Piece world would you least like to get for yourself or a loved one? So leave your comments down below, and anybody that's an actual doctor or is like, I don't know, a physician assistant or a nurse or somebody that works at a hospital, if you have any 2 cents to chime in on that, I would love to hear it. Okay. Thanks for watching, everybody. This will be Law Teching, signing out. Bye.